This is a blowing off steam talk sponsored by The Ohio State University Newark, Denison University, and the Granville Public Library. This is Gill Wright Miller, Professor and Chair of Dance at Denison University speaking, and this is Tuesday, October 13th, 2020, 7 o'clock p.m. The title of this talk is Shall We Dance? Social, Gymnastic, and Aesthetic Dance at Denison. I want to start with a little background. Denison, which was first a Baptist school, claims to have been founded in 1831, and we can go with that date. I think we could debate when the actual university began, as opposed to a high school or a finishing school. But one thing I can claim, while there was certainly art and music, dance was not mentioned in any early documents of these institutions. In fact, the addendum, which were the school's joint yearbook, makes no reference at all until the 1900s. But in the post-Civil War era, the 1870s, we begin to see a nod towards its occurrence on and off campus. And I'm going to share a few quick examples of the many from that early time. On the one hand, dance was primarily a recreational activity. In 1877, the student editors of the Denison Collegian discussed, quote, Sophocles having been chosen to lead the chorus in which he danced, close quote. Instead of condemning this carnal display, it is noted as a fitting augury of his future greatness. Now, this was the same year the men argued, unsuccessfully I might add, for a gymnasium so that they could participate in recreational activities. So it's not surprising that they were finding support for their argument in their studies. 6 months later, same publication, the men were bragging about a maypole dance having been, quote, pleasantly replaced by the early dawn musketry. This was an annual prank to awaken everyone very, very early on May Day. And its naming, by calling it a long-standing tradition, indicated that without any doubt, maypole dances had been there for quite a while. A year later, the Collegian critiqued freshmen for the absurdities of imitating European fashion inappropriately. To dance all night, it began, may answer for a class of hereditary nobles whose chief object is to kill time, but it is not for working men who have no time for child's play. Note that the objection is not religiously based, but rather on a waste of time unworthy of modest men training to be merchants. So on the one hand, dance was primarily recreational, but on the other hand, dance was equally a social activity. In the last part of the 20th century, as the men's and women's institutions, Denison and Shepherdson, grew closer together, sharing buildings and aspects of the curriculum, a score of dance references document the women throwing dances for the men. Here's one that's typical. In February 1880, quote, the Buxton Inn was the first stop in highlighting the mystic music of the waltz. And then the students went on across the street to the room above Jones and Bro for a meal at 11 o'clock p.m. and back for a second dance party until 3 a.m. There were apparently many social dances involving men and women in public places, even across campuses. How fitting, though, to close the century with a strong statement against any dancing, an indication that far too much of it was going on, which demanded admonition from the officers of the two schools, Denison and Shepherdson. What I'm about to quote is from the March 6, 1897 Denisonian. It is certainly true, and everywhere accepted as true, that the positions of the faculties of instruction of Denison University and Shepherdson College is unequivocally opposed to dancing, and that the chief belief of Granville Baptists in general and the opinion of the vast majority of the students of the Granville Baptist institutions are unmistakably directed against dancing. That there may be a meager few of Denison's students who dance, it's not to be taken as evidence that this diversion has any approval from the officers of our institutions, or from the Granville Baptists, or from the great majority of our students. And with that, the 20th century arrived, ushering in, at Denison, a new form of theatrical dance for academic credit. Oh, the irony. Now, in the Western world, what we think of as art dance was just developing from the more middle-class vaudeville. Only 5 years after the officers condemned dancing on campus, the Denisonian reported that the community had secured at enormous expense the great dance artist, Mr. Bunion Shifter, in his latest clog and buck and wing specialty. In fact, the very first person to be designated as a guest artist was a traveling African-American dancer. Buck and wing was a designation for the style of tap dancing that he did. I want to share what those dances looked like because they could be identified as the inception of the diversity within the dance program. This video is probably not Bunion Shifter, but it is a company of traveling dance artists from the exact same year, 1903, so it perhaps is Bunion Shifter. Recreational and social dancing continued as this image of students participating in the clearly re-established tradition of the maypole dance demonstrates. But as vaudeville morphed into aesthetic dance across Europe and the United States, the Joint School Yearbook, the addendum, documents that Shepherdson was already teaching grand marches, Highland flings, and Irish waltzes. This Highland sword dance is obviously not from the 20th century, but I want you to see how demanding this traditional dance form is. It has hardly changed in the 100 years. And one more early 20th century fact to bring into focus, just for fun. Although they were not fully integrated, Denison and Shepherdson shared buildings, shared curriculum, and shared faculty at the turn of the century, but they were not gender neutral. In dance, that played out like this. The dance courses offered to the men were called, quote, aesthetic gymnastics, close quote, and those offered to the women were called, quote, aesthetic dance, close quote. Same faculty, segregated classes. And I have here a beautiful picture of the men's gymnastics dance from 1912. Note that this is in Cleveland Hall, now called Bryant Arts Center, and I also want you to take notice of the men in coat and tie up on the track, the running track that went around the gymnasium in the center of the picture up at the very top. So I'm excited to trace back the commitment we have in our dance department now to diversity, world dance, site-specific work, all the way back to these beginnings. The campus soon proved to be sympathetic to the developing art form of dance. Here's what Denison's campus looked like in 1918, when Ruth Atwood was a student. I'm just going to give you a second to peek at that image more closely and see if you recognize any buildings. graduated from the Columbus School for Girls and Shepherdson College, serving the Maskers, which was a group promoting dance drama, as its secretary, so she was used to working with physical activities in big groups. After Shepherdson, she attended Wellesley College and then Columbia University. And then Denison hired her as the director of physical education for women. In 1921, she undertook this enormous piece called The Opening Door, illustrated here on the south lawn in front of what is now Stone Hall. And I have two details of this picture. I want you to note the nod to Greek antiquity, something Isadora purposefully nurtured to establish dance's place among the upper class audiences. Now, Ruth did several large-scale embodied events in her tenure here, and one of the things I love about this image these images, is the clear evidence that counters repeated historical claims in U.S. dance history that art dance was really only happening in New York and then San Francisco. Art dance considers its inception as Martha Graham's establishment of her company, 1926, and dance education considers its inception as Margaret Dobler's establishment of the first dance major at University of Wisconsin-Madison, also 1926. Yet Denison, in the midst of the Midwest, had already established aesthetic performances and had committed to a curriculum at least simultaneously, as we shall see. Let's flash back just a teeny bit to Helen Barr, 1924, who had been hired to head the newly forming Women's Physical Education Department. Barr brought in the first trained dance faculty, trained in Europe, in her colleague Helen Badenoch, and the two crafted aesthetic dance as central to the physical education of women. It's largely to Helen Badenoch that Denison owes the existence of the dance curriculum, now just shy of 100 years old. Our current dance major reflects Badenoch's keenly developed ideas in three areas: movement practice courses, dance studies courses, and a performance group, then called Orchesis. Her curriculum was adopted by the Denison governance as early as 1927. By 1940, the performing group was well established on campus, so much so that it made the front page of the Denisonian when they selected 25 new members from among the junior and senior classes. Freshmen and sophomores were not admitted, although they were required to take dance courses, and it was something they aspired to. Badenoch died tragically of a terminal illness in 1942, Helen Barr at her side, but led by the Delta Gammas, both Helens had been members of that sorority, the entire Denison community honored, maintained, and developed Badenoch's legacy. One of those ways was by building an enormous dance library at Denison in her name, which is how I first learned of her. The frontispiece in each dance book they donated had a little tag in it that said "A loving gift in honor of Helen Badenoch." And I wondered who she was, which is what started this research. In 1950, the WPE faculty included the just hired Associate Professor and Chair Natalie Shepard, Assistant Professor Julia Denham, Instructor Amy Turnell, and what turned out to be the one-year hire of Denham's undergraduate friend from Williams and Smith, Instructor Virginia Northrop. Denham took the lead in revising the curriculum during her 2-year tenure. But Mrs. Northrop returned to Denison after a 2-year leave of absence to pursue her graduate work at Sarah Lawrence in the fall of '53, and now she was a permanent member of the physical education faculty with academic rank, hired to teach modern dance, composition, and dance as an art form. Upon her return, one of the first major public events Mrs. Northrop coordinated was the guest appearance of the famed dancers Jose Limon, Pauline Kohner, Lucas Hoving, Betty Jones, and Ruth Courier. For those of you unfamiliar with dance, these are the biggest names in modern dance history, with Limon holding the honor of having been named by Dwight D. Eisenhower as the first American company to travel in the president's newly established Dance as Cultural Diplomacy series. This, by the way, was a series that Eisenhower had come up with post-World War II in order to show the world that America was not just about might, but also about culture. And he cultivated that perspective by sending dance companies abroad. 16 years after Northrop was first hired, and under the direction of President Blair Knapp, dance moved from physical education to the fine arts division, and Northrop was tenured, becoming the first associate professor of dance. And so it was the start of a new era, Denison embracing the discipline not only as an area of study worthy of a tenured faculty line, but also of belonging rightfully in the fine arts. Now, lest you are feeling fearful, recreational dance continued. Here we have an image of a maypole dance in the 60s, and two images, one of square dancing and one of a sock hop in the 70s. But it was in the early 70s that the administration brought to campus Mrs. Northrop's mentor, Bessie Schoenberg. Bessie had been the head of the Sarah Lawrence Graduate School when Jenny had been a student there 20 years earlier. And Bessie Schoenberg is the person after whom the coveted International Dance Awards are named. There are the Oscars, the Emmys, the Grammys, the Tonys, and the Bessies. By bringing in Schoenberg, once again, Denison was at the head of the class in dance education. In March 1971, a recommendation was made for the full-blown dance major program structured within an autonomous dance department which would not be adjunct to theater, physical education, or any other department. It passed with the full support of the teaching faculty and then moved to the Alpha Chi Omega House, now the cinema building at Denison. The first dance major was Lynn Kothira, class of 60, who was able to claim theater and dance as a double major by special arrangement. Here, Lynn Kothira is the second from the right, sitting on the floor. 13 years later, Connie Bergstein Dow was grandfathered in, having completed all the requirements for the newly passed independent major. So in many ways, Connie is the first full-fledged dance major, with many more to follow immediately. Having outgrown the sorority house, the dance department then moved again in the mid-70s to Doane Gymnasium, now known as Doane Dance. And it was in that building that we remained until the present moment. So about 50 years. Almost immediately, a public face was put on this new major via the Vail Series. By 1979, the university had received a large endowment that made the series possible. While conceived as funding for the performing arts, Denison simply had no appropriate space to present anything other than music. But with some ingenuity about space, the Vail Series was able to eke out a few. The Jazz Tap Ensemble in 1980, Sweet Honey in the Rock in 1990, and Rhythm and Shoes in 1993. But it was another 10 years before dance reappeared in the Vail Series, in the offering of Bobby McFerrin and Friends, with dance students who had been rehearsed and honed as improvisationalists by guest artists Chris Aiken and Angie Hauser in January 2003. Let's take a look. Other dance events were to follow, and one of my favorites is this one of Dada Masilo in her first U.S. performance at none other than Swayze Chapel, Denison University. Not New York, not San Francisco, but quaint Granville, Ohio. As you're watching, I want to ask that you notice the way Dada Masilo blends traditional with contemporary, Eurocentric movement with Afrocentric movement, Earth-inspired vocabulary with Heaven-inspired vocabulary. And by that I mean gaining power coming up from the earth, through her feet, into her body, versus reaching for power from above and holding on. I could watch quite a bit of this, but I'm going to move on. The Vail Endowment also provided for a minority artist in residence line to rotate in the fine arts. And I have here on the slide the division of three aspects of the Vail Endowment: a performing arts series, a minority artist in residence, and student arts scholarships. Noel Hall was the first to occupy this position at length. His arrival at Denison was for 7 weeks in the spring 1981, but Noel was exquisite at teaching both Graham technique and what he named ethnic jazz, and he stayed at Denison for 7 years. His successor, April Berry, who had danced with the Alvin Ailey Company, also stayed at Denison for 7 additional years. So we are grateful that the Vail Endowment made both of these things possible, both the series and the impact on our curriculum. And that minority artist in residence position brought us the World Dance Program. In 1990, emboldened by the campus buzz of Western versus non-Western, the dance program was able to amplify the community's perhaps discontent with our Eurocentrism by bringing artists from other continents and other countries to Granville. And to accomplish this, we established a world dance line that we were fortunate to host for 10 more years. Each residency was a semester long, and each included a performance. I'm going to share with you just 5 excerpts to enjoy the diversity of cultures we were able to bring to the area. And I want to make a note that I was really careful in selecting the next world dance person so that there was some resonance between the last one and the next one, so that the students could see that there was something different but also something alike in the various dance forms. We started with Brenda Buffalino, who trained in the Afro-Caribbean rhythm tap, jazz, and vaudeville styles. Brenda had been a hoofer since the age of 6. Both of her parents were entertainers, and she was eventually the founder of the American Tap Dance Foundation. I want you to notice the live musicians that are on stage. And this performance is happening in the Don't Dance studio that was turned into a performance lab when we needed it to. Then we link that to the rhythm in Irish step. Some of you may not know that Warren Nichiara of Granville Dance and Music was brought to Granville first through the World Dance Program. And the next year we offered the oldest classical dance tradition of India, Bharatanatyam, which is a synthesis of both temple and court dance, with the music this comes from the south part of India. Its roots are traced back to ancient 500 AD Sanskrit, and I want you to take particular notice of the arm movements, which will resonate with the next selection. One of my favorites was Lani Aloha teaching Hawaiian hula dance. Not the version you get at the airport, but the version you get in the actual culture. Watch how lovely the students are doing this work, but also notice how different this energy is, spatially direct and strong, from the energy of rhythm tap or Irish step. But the arms share a very specific specificity with Bharatanatyam. Near the end of the World Dance Program, we needed a larger stage than Denison was able to offer for Clara Ramona's flamenco. So for this, we partnered with the Midland Theater in downtown Newark, got buses, imported our students, and sold out the house. This was an exquisite way for us to partner Town and Gown. And also I want to just mention that I'm grateful to Mike Morris, who was the director of the Midland Theater and is now the director of the Vail Series at Denison. All right, so we have 14 years in 2 Vail minority artists and 10 more years of a world dance program. So that's 24 years. I want to talk a little bit about how our history fashioned what our current curriculum is. So yes, we are still interested in recreational and social dance. This image is of a flash mob, and it's a great example of making dance fun and available to everyone. It should be noted that our first independent dance major, Connie Dow, returned to campus to choreograph this flash mob for us. And we offered it as quite a surprise on Trustee Weekend. In the middle of this slide, you see President Dale Noble. And we continue to value other forms of site-specific work as well. The example here, shown as the descendant of Granville's annual carnival and maypole dance, works that live outside of the proscenium stage and adhere to the terrain on which they are supported and offered. This was the construction site on campus for the building of Burton Morgan. And for over 100 years, African-derived work continues to be central to our mission, so much so that we enjoy a national reputation for being not only the first, but in fact the only liberal arts college that shares equally Eurocentric and Afrocentric traditions in our required curriculum. But the theme that rings throughout all of this is the inherent collaboration between dance and music. Here we are embodying this commitment by sharing site-specific work in the Art Museum to musicians of the Tutti Festival, which is a biannual affair sponsored by the music department. This particular work, this particular section is by Leah Edwards, and these dancers are called Tiny Tooties. Okay, brings us to the present day. In the present, we are indeed fortunate to have just completed the new Eisner Center. Having a performing space on campus that links town and gown so conveniently is surely a gift to everyone in the area. I want to share these last 3 clips that illustrate how our curricular themes are living in this new space as they're developing. The first one, these are all, by the way, from the opening year of the Eisner Center, which was 2019-2020, but you may recall that midway through 2020, we were shut down because of a pandemic. So these are works that come from the December 2019 offering. Follow Me is a site-specific work that responds to the environment in order to frame a message about noticing the context in which an idea is being expressed. This work was 5 segments of about 2 minutes each, repeated 5 times, with the audience also divided into bits and moving from segment to segment. The second one is a piece called 1969, and it is a work that gathers historical and cultural artifacts to frame a message about the many ways the body dances with energy, passion, and power. This work highlights research from the archives of the Black Student Union as that organization celebrated its 50th anniversary this past spring. Notice we have live musicians on stage. And this third last piece is called Angels of Ambivalence. It's a work that demonstrates our collaborations not only between musicians that we get to work with every day, but also in this case with Third Coast Percussion, a Vail artist, a series of musicians. They're in the 4 corners of the Thorson Dance Studio that you see here. Several times, but these dancers got to work with them for just the week before this performance was actually premiered. So, this talk, shall we dance? Who is meant to be asking that question? Is it the school founding Baptists? The two administrations when the schools were merging? The early modern dancers who set up the department? The mission of Vail, of world dance? Is the invitation to dance the fortunate edict of collaboration or of new bricks and mortar? No, I think this question represents a fundamental invitation into a liberal arts education. The creative practice of dance, whether it is recreational, social, or art, is a somatic inquiry that places its highest value on knowing from the inside out. As an inquiry, the study of dance explores entering the abyss of the unknown, shedding personal limitations, trying on a variety of cultural perspectives, nurturing creative and expressive responses, and encouraging empathy. So I want to leave you with two messages. The first is an historical takeaway. Whether or not the original motivation for the curriculum was to demonstrate the educated as having the mental and financial space to study the arts, nevertheless, Denison students have had the opportunity to learn about self and others through dance for over a century. Denison has consistently supported walking, well, let's say dancing, in another's shoes as an appropriate way to attend to another's culture and therefore perhaps their perspective. And the second message is a personal takeaway. We have now an urgent need to listen from the inside out. So many of us are spending an inordinate amount of time on computers, communicating through technology, taking courses, or meeting with friends and relatives via Zoom. Through dance, all of us have the opportunity to learn about self and others, even in this pandemic, even socially distanced. Dance provides us an opportunity to take a break from that screen, to go outside, to witness leaves dancing off of tree limbs and traveling or floating through space. Breathe the air. Inhale the rhythms around you. Move to them. Move with them. Like nature, we should dance every day. When we resonate with other human beings, we are indeed healing division. In the midst of our past and current practices, I want to leave you with this question. Shall we dance? Thank you.